Every country on earth at the moment is reforming public education. There are two reasons for it. The first of them is economic. People are trying to work out, how do we educate our children to take their place in the economies of the 21st century? How do we do that, given that we can't anticipate what the economy will look like at the end of next week, as the recent turmoil is demonstrating? How do we do that? The second, though, is cultural. Every country on earth is trying to figure out, how do we educate our children so they have a sense of cultural identity and so that we can pass on the cultural genes of our communities while being part of the process of globalization. How do we square that circle? The problem is they're trying to meet the future by doing what they did in the past. And on the way, they're alienating millions of kids who don't see any purpose in going to school. When we went to school, we were kept there with a story, which was if you worked hard and did well and got a college degree, you would have a job. Our kids don't believe that. And they're right not to, by the way. You're better having a degree than not, but it's not a guarantee anymore. And particularly not if the route to it marginalizes most of the things that you think are important about yourself. Some people say we have to raise standards as if this is a breakthrough. You know, like, really, yes, we should. Why would you lower them? You know, I mean, I haven't come across an argument that persuades me of lowering them. But raising them, of course we should raise them. The problem is that the current system of education was designed and conceived and structured for a different age. It was conceived in the intellectual culture of the Enlightenment and in the economic circumstances of the Industrial Revolution. Before the middle of the 19th century, there were no systems of public education. Not really. I mean, you could get educated by Jesuits, you know, if you had the money. But public education, paid for from taxation, compulsory to everybody and free at the point of delivery, that was a revolutionary idea. And many people objected to it. They said it's not possible for many street kids, working class children, to benefit from public education. They're incapable of learning to read and write, and why are we spending time on this? So there's also built into it a whole series of assumptions about social structure and capacity. It was driven by an economic imperative of the time, but running right through it was an intellectual model of the mind, which was essentially the Enlightenment view of intelligence. That real intelligence consists in the capacity for a certain type of deductive reasoning and a knowledge of the classics originally, what we come to think of as academic ability. And this is deep in the gene pool of public education, that there are really two types of people, academic and non-academic, smart people and non-smart people. And the consequence of that is that many brilliant people think they're not, because they've been judged against this particular view of the mind. So we have twin pillars, economic and intellectual. And my view is that this model has caused chaos in many people's lives. It's been great for some. There have been people who have benefited wonderfully from it. But most people have not. Instead, they suffer this. This is the modern epidemic, and it's as misplaced and it's as fictitious. This is the plague of ADHD. Now, this is a map of the incidence of ADHD in America, or prescriptions for ADHD. Don't mistake me here. I don't mean to say there is no such thing as attention deficit disorder. I'm not qualified to say if there is such a thing. I know that a great majority of psychologists and paediatricians think there is such a thing. But it's still a matter of debate. What I do know for a fact is it's not an epidemic. These kids are being medicated as routinely as we had our tonsils taken out. And on the same whimsical basis, and for the same reason, medical fashion. Our children are living in the most intensely stimulating period in the history of the earth. They're being besieged with information and calls for their attention from every platform, computers, from iPhones, from advertising holdings, from hundreds of television channels. And we're penalizing them now for getting distracted. From what? You know, boring stuff. At school, for the most part. It seems to me it's not a coincidence totally that the incidence of ADHD has risen in parallel with the growth of standardized testing. Now, these kids are being given Ritalin and Adderall and all manner of things, often quite dangerous drugs, to get them focused and calm them down. But according to this, attention deficit disorder increases as you travel east across the country. People start losing interest in Oklahoma. They can hardly think straight in Arkansas. And by the time they get to Washington, they've lost it completely. And there are separate reasons for that, I believe. It's a fictitious epidemic. If you think of it, the arts, and I don't say this exclusively of the arts, I think it's also true of science and of maths, but I say about the arts particularly because they are the victims of this mentality currently, particularly. The arts especially address the idea of aesthetic experience. An aesthetic experience is one in which your senses are operating at their peak, when you're present in the current moment, when you're resonating with the excitement of this thing that you're experiencing, when you are fully alive. An anesthetic is when you shut your senses off and deaden yourself to what's happening. And a lot of these drugs are that. We're getting our children through education by anesthetizing them. And I think we should be doing the exact opposite. We shouldn't be putting them asleep. We should be waking them up to what they have inside of themselves. But the model we have is this. I believe we have a system of education that is modeled on the interests of industrialism and in the image of it. I'll give you a couple of examples. Schools are still pretty much organized on factory lines, ringing bells, separate facilities, specialized into separate subjects. We still educate children by batches. We put them through the system by age group. Why do we do that? Why is there this assumption that the most important thing kids have in common is how old they are? It's like the most important thing about them is their date of manufacture. You know what I mean? Well, I know kids who are much better than other kids at the same age in different disciplines, or at different times of the day, or better in smaller groups than in large groups, or sometimes they want to be on their own. If you're interested in the model of learning, you don't start from this production line mentality. It's essentially about conformity, and increasingly it's about that as you look at the growth of standardized testing and standardized curricula. And it's about standardization. I believe we've got to go in the exact opposite direction. That's what I mean about changing the paradigm. There was a great study done recently of divergent thinking. Published a couple of years ago. Divergent thinking isn't the same thing as creativity. I define creativity as the process of having original ideas that have value. Divergent thinking isn't a synonym, but it's an essential capacity for creativity. It's the ability to see lots of possible answers to a question, lots of possible ways of interpreting a question, to think what Edward de Bono would probably call laterally, to think not just in linear or convergent ways, to see multiple answers, not one. So, there are tests for this. One kind of cod example would be, people might be asked to say, how many uses can you think of for a paperclip? One of those routine questions. Most people might come up with 10 or 15. People who are good at this might come up with 200. And they do that by saying, well, could the paperclip be 200 foot tall and be made out of foam rubber? Does it have to be a paperclip as we know it, Jim? Now, there are tests for this, and they gave them to 1,500 people. This is in a book called Breakpoint and Beyond. And on the protocol of the test, if you scored above a certain level, you'd be considered to be a genius at divergent thinking. Okay? So my question to you is, what percentage of the people tested, of the 1,500, scored at genius level for divergent thinking? Now, you need to know one more thing about them. These were kindergarten children. So what do you think? What percentage at genius level? 80. 80, okay. 98%. Now, the thing about this was it was a longitudinal study. So they retested the same children 5 years later, age of 8 to 10. What do you think? 50? They retested them again 5 years later, ages 13 to 15. You can see a trend here, can't you? Now, this tells an interesting story, because you could have imagined it going the other way, couldn't you? You start off not being very good, but you get better as you get older. But this shows two things. One is, we all have this capacity, and two, it mostly deteriorates. Now, a lot of things have happened to these kids as they've grown up. A lot. But one of the most important things that happened to them, I'm convinced, is that by now they've become educated. They've spent 10 years at school being told there's one answer, it's at the back. And don't look. And don't copy, because that's cheating. I mean, outside schools, that's called collaboration, but inside schools. Now, this isn't because teachers want it this way. It's just because it happens that way. It's because it's in the gene pool of education. We have to think differently about human capacity. We have to get over this old conception of academic, non-academic, abstract, theoretical, vocational, and see it for what it is, a myth. Secondly, we have to recognize that most great learning happens in groups, that collaboration is the stuff of growth. If we atomize people and separate them and judge them separately, we form a kind of disjunction between them and their natural learning environment. And thirdly, it's crucially about the culture of our institutions, the habits of the institution and the habitats that they occupy.
Mr. Sam Sweat, our Assistant Superintendent, is that correct? Deputy. And very glad to have Dr. Peters from Southern Crescent Tech and Dr. Dimmitt from Clayton State. So we're going to ask actually Sam to kick this off and give me just a second.
Okay. Thank you. I just want to thank Virginia and the Chamber for having this session here, this retreat. While I was on the bus, I met a lot of people I did not know, and it was a really good trip. I think anytime you can get together and you can collaborate and communicate and try to think differently, because we are in a different type of economic period than ever before, that's something that we need to do, because we all are faced with problems and we all want growth, especially the school system. So with that being said, what we just saw was really, really good. I saw that about 4 years ago, and it really speaks to education. And I want you to know that the school system in Fayette County is still the shining star of the South Metro area. I think from what, who was on first? Matt. When Matt was talking this morning, as far as, I'm not into marketing, but I would argue that we need businesses to move south of Atlanta, since they wouldn't be tied up in all that northern traffic up there. And the school district here is just as good, if not better, than any of the school districts up there. And I would say this: I know we have less crime, and I know we have better transportation models in terms of being able to get somewhere quickly than they do on the north side. But that would be my argument in my marketing campaign to get people on the south side. This is Anthony Robbins. If you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always gotten. And I think we could say that about the little video we just saw previously. Fayette County is the only school system, and this goes back to 2011, with an enrollment of more than 10,000, that all schools made adequate yearly progress. If you know, and that happened in 2012 as well, if you know, with the state school superintendent, we have a waiver now, and we go with what we call the CCRPI, College and Career Readiness Performance Index. That replaced AYP. And so we're doing a really good job of getting kids in elementary school, upper grades of elementary, middle and high, to start thinking about the careers that they're interested in when they go on to college or they go into some other type of career area. Southern Crescent Tech would be an item that they might be thinking about, the military, et cetera, et cetera. Fayette County Public Schools is recognized as one of the premier, if not the premier, public school systems in the state of Georgia. We still are at the very top with all our standardized test scores. We're above the national average in all of those test scores. We still continue to perform, so our school system is healthy, it is vibrant, but we do have some problems, we do have some issues like everybody else. Our students excel in all areas. One of the areas that you just talked about or was discussed in that video was the arts, and how it really helps with creativity and the ability to think differently. And Fayette County schools are rich in the arts, as well as academics and athletics. But is that enough? The emphasis when we went to school was on reading, writing, and arithmetic, and it was on very much that industrialized model that they were talking about in the previous video. Today, We must help our students develop other skills. And what are they? The 3 new R's are rigor, relevance, and relationships. So the curriculum has to be more demanding. It has to be more rigorous. It has to be relevant to keep kids engaged. That's the problem with the state of Georgia's high dropout rate. Kids are not relating to the value of what education is for. It was like he said on his slide, teachers are up there saying blah, 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 blah. How do you get them engaged? That's what it's all about. And then what type of relationship, if I'm the teacher, can I build with the student? That is critical if you're going to capture that student. You've got to have a relationship. We must challenge our students. They need firsthand experiences, experiential learning. We also need to couple that with service learning. And I want you to know that BYOT was an initiative that Dr. Bearden, our superintendent, initiated with some of the things I'm telling you. We're doing that at our high schools and our middle schools where kids can bring their technology devices. Teachers can allow them to use it so they can collaborate, they can communicate together, and I think we're on the right track. When we shared this with Chick-fil-A and Dan Cathy, he said this is exactly what we need in the business model. We need people to come out of high school and college knowing how to communicate, knowing how to work in groups, knowing how to think differently. So that's our initiative with BYOT, and again, it speaks to the issue of relevance and engagement. Relationships. Think of teachers that you had in school. Think of the one teacher that had the biggest effect on you. And then what was the favorite quality of that teacher? I want you to think about that for just a minute. And then let's talk about that. What was your favorite teacher? Anybody want to start that off? Okay, Scott? Uh-huh. Okay, enthusiasm. All right. Who wants to take another shot? Yes, ma'am.
Favorite teacher was Mr. Mosley. He was a math teacher, and he saw something in me.
Okay, so his unique approach to develop you. Okay, he cared about you. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Okay, that you mattered and he communicated with you. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
My 8th grade teacher was Miss Susie Coleman, and Miss Coleman loved me when nobody else did.
Okay. That was good, Bob. That was a good shot. I like that. Okay. Good. Yes, sir, Ed. Okay. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Oh, very interesting. Okay. Good. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
I was one of those students got bored a lot. And his approach was he didn't say, well, don't be bored, don't do this, don't do the other. He would come and say, well, I need, he's a biology teacher. And he said, well, I need charts. And I know you can draw. Would you create charts?
Oh, that's good.
So I had 50 charts, and I learned a lot. And he didn't
You helped teach the course.
he challenged me
Good.
and made it my decision.
Good. Good. Okay, and anybody else? All right, Brian. Okay, no Pat. Yeah. Yeah. Good. 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 And I've heard other comments about Pat being an outstanding teacher. And we're very, very fortunate in Fayette County to have some exceptional teachers that are extremely committed. But engagement, and what you all spoke to, was the ability to care about someone, the ability to give them individualized attention, the ability to allow them to move beyond where the other students were. And so it's becoming a tougher situation for a teacher today with everything that's on them, but it has not changed. The relationship piece, the ability to take students beyond the level of where their peers are, so they will still be engaged in the curriculum. And that would go whether you're at Clayton State, Southern Crescent, or Fayette County Schools. It does not matter. Kids will not care how much you know until they know how much you care. I love that quote. That's my favorite quote. And that happens to be Dan Gann on the right. He's the science teacher at Starrs Mill that I hired, and he was the teacher of the year at Starrs Mill last year. And those are the kids with him. Outstanding science teacher. Students today still need to master a curriculum. However, there are skills that CEOs all over the world are stating there that are critical. And so we'll examine the 4 C's, and that's what we're working on in Fayette County. Long associated with the arts, the need to think about creativity and innovation. Those are things that we need to talk about. At Chick-fil-A, I heard someone mention the other day that they just spent a lot of money on an innovative lab up there. So they're trying to spur on innovations with their corporation. Okay, the need for written communication and oral communication, and the need to be able to use technology. Those are critical skills in the workplace that kids coming out of high school and college need to be able to write, they need to be able to speak correctly, and they need to be able to communicate effectively using their technology. Okay, one aspect of society is that, okay, the steepest decline is that the work being done by individuals, so that's just a different piece. Okay, and then employers often cite that employees who fail in the workplace is because they are not able to work effectively with others. So when you have this technology component, my wife gets very frustrated with me when I go home about getting on the laptop or with my son with his technology device. So it's really a fine line. You know, when is the appropriate time to communicate, and when is it the appropriate time to get on your technology device? I still am learning how to do that. I have to coach myself on that. My wife thinks it's extremely rude if you're in a meeting to get on your device and look at that. So I understand that. So what are we doing about it? What can we do in Fayette County Schools? Don Opar and the Chamber brought in Tony Wagner to speak to our administrators. We read this as a book study a couple of years ago when Jeff Bearden first came to Fayette County Schools, the Global Achievement Gap. And he looked at the skills that we're saying that we need to teach our kids. In Wagner's book, he talks about the 21st century learners and the skills that are needed, and those are the 4 skills up there: creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, and communication. And I tell you what, I would go back to this, and I would say that these 4 skills, and this is why I like coming to this type of event and why I enjoyed being on the bus to Franklin, Tennessee, because these 4 skills were the skills that we used on that trip. And if you think about that trip in Franklin, Tennessee, and you think about public education, the Chamber of Commerce, and all of their public governmental officials, they all did these things to draw in industry from Nashville that created the environment that they had in Franklin to make it successful. And I think that's what's needed in Fayette County, is everybody coming together to work together to solve our issues, because we certainly have issues. And I'm not saying that they're insurmountable, but I'm saying we need to address them as a complete team. Begin with the end in mind. What is the solution? What do we want our kids to know when they leave Fayette County High School? What skills do they have to be successful? And we did this. Dr. Bearden did this about 1.5 years ago. And these skills were a lot of the skills that came out of that, okay? And we are part of Ed Leader 21 with Ken Kay, where we're actually embedding these skills into our curriculum, okay? Because it's a work in progress. The challenges, Virginia asked me about the challenges and the opportunities. The Common Core Georgia Performance Standards, that's currently what we are using as our curriculum. It is not a federal mandated curriculum. It is a curriculum of states. 48 states are a part of PARC, the Partnership of Assessment and Readiness for Colleges and Careers, and that is the curriculum. It's called a Common Core curriculum that all 48 states will use. So if I'm taking 10th grade language arts in Fayetteville, Georgia, and I move to Oregon, basically the same curriculum will be taught. It makes a lot of sense. I'm very excited as an educator to be a part of this. The rigor of the curriculum is ramped up tremendously so we can be globally more competitive with our kids. Much more emphasis on reading at a younger age. It's what we need to do. Heavy emphasis on mathematics and as well as science and the other areas. So I think Southern Crescent and Clayton State will agree that we are having to ramp things up in public schools. We have a new interim superintendent that begins January 3rd through June 30th, Dan Caldwell. He's been a member of this community for 36 years. I think he's going to do a great job. We have 2 new board members that will begin